Welcome to YouTube. I'm Michael Horn, joined by my co-author and colleague and friend, Bob Mesta.
Good
And
morning,
I
Michael.
wrote, yeah, good morning. I wrote an interesting piece that got the social webs buzzing a little bit yesterday, Bob,
Yeah.
about, I was just sort of like, we're all talking about coronavirus and COVID-19, and those are important issues. I wrote about them today, but I wanted to talk about algebra, and do we still need it? And after I wrote this piece for EdSurge, I'll put it in the show notes, but you came back and you called me up and you said, Michael, it's a little like Latin algebra. What did
Yeah.
you mean by that?
Yeah. So my thing is algebra. I think it's more about the thinking of it. And if you think about Latin is one of those languages that is in the root of so many other things, whether it's medicine and law, and like if you go to the root of words, it's just so important. And what you
Yeah, it's
realize is
true.
that
Like you learn it to be good at an SAT. If you actually understand Latin, you'll have
yeah,
no
yeah,
problem with the
exactly,
vocab
exactly.
stuff. Yeah,
So it's a really good foundational language, but what nobody speaks it. It's literally not. It's not a language that you can do really anything with, but it's a great foundational piece. And so to me, like I do believe that we need to be talking about the data literacy, as you pointed out. But algebra is like in my mind is not old fashioned, but it's based on kind of the mechanical world. It's like three dimensions of like what's the volume of a cube, right? But
hmm
the reality is, like in days today, we have like I just walked out of a meeting where we're doing 26 dimensional math. Like I need to
26
know
dimensions.
algebra.
So
Yeah, so I
algebra is not
need.
going to help you with that.
Well, it is a form of algebra because it's just not three dimensions; it's 26 dimensions. But the fact
Right.
is that the way we teach it is so like this is the way you can do it, and we teach people like what to think about it as opposed to how to think, and that process of thinking in multi dimensions is really important. But at the same time, I just don't think that people appreciate the value of it. So as they're going through it, it's like, well, why do I need to know this? I don't know what I'm going to look like. I'm never going to have to calculate this. I'll just go to Google, right? And so I
Yeah.
think the fact is like at least for me in the innovation space, it's literally making sure that we have algebraic thinking. But I just think we need to update the way we teach it in a way that actually helps people see things and see variables and understand how they relate. Ultimately, there's a difference between correlation and causation. And so to me, what Latin does is Latin gives you the underlying root causes of how a word became something. And so the reality is that linear algebra has turned into a correlation thing, whereas like people still don't understand how to use it. They just know that like these two things correlate. So when I correlate,
Mm.
drownings and ice cream sales, I could actually come to the conclusion that ice cream causes people to drown,
So it's
right?
interesting just to jump in on you on that. One thing I've been struck by as we've moved to more of a common core math, I'm not sure you're allowed to use that phrase anymore, but they basically are embedding algebraic concepts in much earlier math learning. And I've been struck
Yes.
in the Montessori math where my kids are right now
Yeah.
that they're they're not even in kindergarten and they're literally doing algebra as they're doing math functions with real world manipulatives. And I think that's probably getting closer to what you're saying, which is like
Yes.
teach the concept and the foundation. You don't necessarily need to make this an exercise in memorizing manipulation of variables for its own sake, abstracted from the actual cause in which you would use it in the real world.
Exactly, exactly. And this is where I think applied learning is there. And then when people want, so the hard part is we all learn differently. Like sometimes I need to learn the concepts and then apply, and sometimes I need to apply and then I can learn
Sure.
the concepts. And I think this is kind of the dilemma is the concept of pedagogy where we have to have the best way of teaching, but it's a two-way street. The best way of teaching is actually relative to the learner. And so I
Yep.
just feel like that to your point, your twin daughters are just to the point where they're learning things in a very different way than we learned things when we were growing up, and that pedagogy has to actually come along with it, and to realize pedagogy it should be about how we actually help people learn, not necessarily how we teach.
Yeah, it's a really good point. So one other question for you, which is one of the other pushbacks that I've seen, which is one I anticipated, but people saying, well, if they don't take algebra, when they get to college, they're foreclosing them from certain STEM careers like chemistry or things like that. My take has
Yeah.
been like, sure, but that means we need to re-architect those subjects as
Yeah.
well to teach
So
those concepts in like while learning chemistry, how do you actually teach algebra in the context of it so it's useful and comes alive? But what's your take?
Yeah, so I look at it as they've tried to make, I'll say, subjects modular. Like I can take
Yes.
algebra and put it with geometry, and then I can put it with, data science, and I can put it with statistics, and we can put it together and make you a data scientist, right? I think the reality is that they've made the boundaries. The key to modularity is the interfaces between the parts. And people have forgot about the interfaces. So if I learn statistics and I learn algebra and I learn geometry, well, they should naturally fit together, but they don't. And the way things fit together is in the real world is like, well, why are sales going down, or why is the enrollment going down, and why is the cost going up? Like those are all data analytic kind of situations you have to be able to do. So I think the problem is we've almost implied modularity, but it's actually not designed to be modular.
So last question, which is if you weren't doing,
By the way, that's just I'm putting it out there, right?
I'm in agreement. I mean, this is something that Clay and I explored and wrestled with in Disrupting Class was what are the bounds between subjects being interdependent with each other and where are they truly modular? My read actually is that a lot of the literacy problems, so let's take it out of math, for example, for a moment, that a lot of the reasons people, once you've learned the foundations of literacy, so I'm not talking about someone like you who has trouble with decoding and things like that, but once you've actually
I actually am an expert at it. I'm just not good at the regular way, your way of doing it. I have my own special
you have your
way.
own system. You have your own system. But once you've mastered that skill set, actually a lot of our literacy challenges as a country are not because we struggle to decode words. It's because we don't have the background knowledge in them. Literally, we've never been exposed to certain subjects. The great example is baseball. You give a group of high-performing readers who know nothing about baseball, a passage about baseball, and you ask them, what's the main idea here? They have no idea, because when you say the runner stole second base, they're like, oh my God, that's terrible.
Right, that's right.
They have no context for what they're reading. And what you realize is actually social studies, science, math, reading, music, arts, these are all actually interdependent subjects. And as much as we want to pull them apart and make them modular, if you don't treat them with coherence, they're just not. And that's not where we are.
Well, and I think the other part is like, Fo said something yesterday around, you've been asked a question.
For those that don't know, this is our friend and colleague Afoso Ojomo at the Christensen Institute, who wrote a great book with Clay Christensen, The Prosperity Paradox.
Yeah, and you've been asking him that. You have been asking him a question. What's the question you've been asking?
Well, I've been trying to figure out what questions he's trying to answer, because he's trying to figure out what he does next in something in the Institute. And I said, what's the real question you're trying to answer? Because once you identify that crisply, the solution will be much clearer, but you haven't had crispness yet around the question.
So this is the thing that I think is part of the problem, is that it's actually as simple as that, is asking what's the right question. And I feel like a lot of school is they're actually giving you the question and the answer, as opposed to helping people frame the question. And I feel like the cool part from being dyslexic is I can make no sense of a paragraph, so I have to think about, like, well, what are they really trying to say here? And everybody else would be implying, one is I have to admit that I don't know, right? School does does not build that, I'll say, lack of confidence or the ability to question and say, like what are they saying? I don't know how to ask somebody that is there. The second is the courage to ask. And so I think the reality is like the glue that's missing between these pieces is questions and the courage to ask when you don't know, because everybody's so bought in that basically I should know it all.
Yep, and that's a good place to end for today, but we'll be back with more thoughts in the future. Right, Bob? You'll come back on?
You got it. Yeah, we'll keep doing this. This is great. Thanks, man.
Thanks for watching.
Yep.